Hello again, and welcome to the St. Louis Blues Hockey Legends Podcast. Tom Calhoun here again to shine a light on the stories of those instrumental in blues history. The Blues Legends Podcast is presented by Sarah Honda, O'Fallon, Illinois. Check out all their great deals and the 618 Sarah Bucks offer at sarahhondaofallon.com. Our participating sponsors, Southwestern Illinois College, your community, your college. And Shane McGranahan, Country Financial. Call Shane at 618-476-3366 for all your home and auto insurance needs. And hello to all you hockey fans of North America listening on the Hockey Podcast Network. On this episode, we visit with the unofficial historian who lived most of the early blues history, the great Blues Hall of Famer Susie Mathieu, as we get some great stories about the Blues GM during the turbulent late 70s and early 80s. Emile the Cat Francis, a Saskatchewan-born goaltender when he played, was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto in 1982 in the Builders category. He came to the Blues in what would become one of the most difficult times in team history to be in charge of a team. Susie's Emile Francis stories coming up on the Blues Hockey Legends Podcast in 60 seconds.
When it's time to find your next car, what's changed in your life? What's driving you to start the process? What are you really looking for? These are the questions we're asking at Sarah Honda. We believe in real communication, real problem solving, and trustworthy long-term relationships with our customers. We're part of your community, and we want you to be part of ours. At Sarah Honda, the experience drives everything. You've got a lot going on in life, and you depend on your car to get you to places you need to be. So when it's time for maintenance or repair, we know you need it done fast and done right. Convenience and quality customer service with team members you can trust. That's what you're looking for. We'll get you safely back on the road and back to your busy life. At Sarah Honda, the experience drives everything.
And on this episode of the St. Louis Blues Hockey Legends Podcast, we're happy to have Susie Mathieu back as our special guest. Susie was with us in 2025, and everybody has told me, Susie, how wonderful that history lesson was that you gave us that time around. And so we wanted to focus on Emile the Cat Francis. A lot of our younger blues fans, I'm sure, don't know much about the Cat, but they should know if they are into blues history a little bit. And so let's see if we can lighten the history books a little bit with some Emile Francis information. You ready to go?
I'm ready whenever you are, Tom.
All right, here we go. Emile Percival Francis, nicknamed the Cat. He was born in 1926 in North Battleford, Saskatchewan. He lived until February 19th of 2022 to the ripe old age of 95. Hockey player, obviously a Canadian. He played, coached, and became a general manager after his playing days. He was up and down from the minors to the NHL for the Chicago Blackhawks and New York Rangers from 1946 to 1952. The nickname the Cat, my little bit of research tells me, came while he was playing for the Moose Jaw Canucks of the Saskatchewan Junior Hockey League during the 45-46 season. A sports writer described him as quick as a cat, Susie, and it stuck.
I'm not surprised. He was of slight build, so the name is very appropriate.
Yeah, he was a small man, sort of Darren Panger-ish, wouldn't you say, as far as body type?
Absolutely. And, my first encounter with him was when he was hired to become the general manager of the Blues under the Solomons era. Mm-hmm. So the very first owners brought him in to shepherd the team forward. And, from there, the legend grows, because I guess one of the least known stories is how he helped save the Blues for St. Louis. Yeah, the Solomon family was overwhelmed with the WHA, which came into being and escalated salaries rather quickly. And then on top of that, there were some issues with the city of St. Louis. The Solomons wanted to build a parking lot in Forest Park and a bridge over to the arena because parking was always a problem. And really, when the city turned them down, it was kind of a signal. But the Cat was the general manager, and he was in place. And he had such a personality. He was an old school hockey person, but he had a tremendous personality. And he told the story of how when the Solomons were putting the team up for sale, he ran into R. Hal Dean, who was the chairman and CEO of Ralston Purina, in the restroom at Busch Stadium, no less.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's where the conversation started about Ralston acquiring the Blues. That was back in the 70s.
Right. And we'll get into the ownership back and forth a little bit here in a bit, but I want to touch a couple other bases just for, history's sake, I guess. He came to the Blues in 76 is what I saw.
Yes.
And he had led the Rangers to 9 consecutive playoff appearances through 1975, but could not deliver a Stanley Cup championship there in 5 decades as a player, coach, and executive. He was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1982 in the Builders category. So he comes to the Blues in 76 as GM, executive vice president, and he accepted a 10% ownership stake in the team is what I read. I didn't remember that part of it. You were there when he came aboard, Susie. So what were your initial thoughts at the time and first impressions of him?
Well, he was a straight shooter, and he was an old school hockey person from the get-go. It was reminiscent for me to look back at his history. When you mentioned North Battleford, Saskatchewan, it kind of clicked. Oh, that's why we had training camp in Regina, Saskatchewan for so many years, because it was home base for the Cat. But he was fair. He was honest. He was a straight shooter. And he was a very, very compassionate person. Great father to his 2 sons, Bobby and Rick, and had a lovely wife, M. Frances, who was small of stature as well. But she was just a wonderful family, and it fit right in with the Solomon family because the organization created a family atmosphere, and he just contributed to that.
That was my next question, if he was a people person or was he more of a business-like guy, but obviously you've already answered that.
Well, he was very, very friendly, compassionate, and I'll tell you a couple stories that illustrate that, later on as we go through this. One in particular that always hit home to me was when he was general manager and Red Berenson was coaching. Bernie Federko and his wife Berna were about to have their first son, and had the Blues been playing anywhere else in the NHL other than Quebec City, Bernie could have been there for the delivery of Jordy and made it to the game. But we were playing in Quebec City, which was 2 flights, St. Louis to Chicago, Chicago to Montreal, and then Montreal get to Quebec. It was impossible. And Red Berenson, another old school, great, great person, but he believed in the old school style, said, well, I wasn't there for the birth of any of my kids. Bernie needs to be there and play. And Emile said, you know what, Red? And he said, and I was present at this. How will you deal with Bernie Federko if anything happens to his wife or his new baby? And of course, Emile, as general manager, allowed Bernie to stay home and miss 1 game. And I thought that was really the human side of Emile Frances. Yeah,
that's a great story. And I wish I'd have known that when I talked to Bernie a while back. That was a good one. So he also coached the team a couple of times, I guess, when he found it necessary to do so in the late 70s when I guess Leo Boivin was let go, in the early 80s after Red Berenson. What do you think? What was he like as a coach? He wanted to find somebody else, I assume.
He really went behind the bench out of necessity. And, it's I don't think that was his first love. I think the general manager side and the president side of things were more appealing to him. At least that was my perspective. But maybe it was because that was how I saw him, and I never had to sit on the bench when he was coaching.
Yeah, well, he spent all those years in the minors. I would think he would have been a good coach from a player's perspective. And you already had the story about that, so I think that bears that out. So on our podcast with you back in January of last year, you told the story about how he was instrumental in keeping the Blues in St. Louis and the Ralston Purina thing. That was the R. Haldane story, right?
Yes, meeting in the restroom at Busch Stadium. And, that came to fruition. And of course, I have to dispel the rumor. So many people have said to me, was the roof of the arena painted in a checkerboard pattern? And Tom, and I know it never was. They just called it the Checker Dome, which was consistent with Ralston Purina's image and logo. But he did keep the team in St. Louis by securing R. Haldane and the support of a major corporation. And as corporate as it was, Emile brought a very human side to it. I'll never forget when Lynn Patrick, who was legendary with the franchise, the first general manager and had a stint as a coach, he left a game, left the press box, was driving home because he had a new puppy, had an aneurysm or a heart event right out in front of Deaconess Hospital, the old Deaconess Hospital that was down there on Oakland Avenue, and passed away. At that point in time, Ralston had very strict corporate rules. You could take a leave of absence for a spouse, a mother, a father, a child, of course, but not for someone like Lynn Patrick. So we all had to take a vacation day to celebrate Lynn's life. And afterwards, Emile said, sorry, I apologize, but this is the way this corporation runs. He was very, very human in that respect.
Yeah, well, that's another great story that only Susie Mathieu, official or unofficial, either one, is the historian for the Blues. And of course, many of you know that the Blues Hall of Fame now also includes Susie as one of the True Blue Award winners from a few years ago. So a Google search comes up with this, and you can verify this or not verify it. In January of '83, amidst severe financial troubles for the Blues franchise, Mr. Francis negotiated a tentative deal to sell the team and move it to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, for approximately $9 million. A, is that how you remember it, that he was instrumental in doing that? And B, $9 million? That's like pocket change these days.
When you look at what franchises have gone for, look at, the Lakers' recent sale. No, I don't remember it happening that way. I do remember a gentleman by the name of Bill Hunter who was interested in purchasing the team and moving it to Saskatoon. I don't recall Emile Francis being the impetus for that to happen. I know he was very, very loyal to keeping the team in St. Louis, and it really pained him to see a franchise struggle that way. And when I think of Emile and I think of 1983, the one thing that pops out in my mind was not initially the transfer of the franchise to Saskatchewan, but the tragedy that happened in Salt Lake City with Ed Kia. And we had sent Ed Kia down to Salt Lake City, our minor league affiliate, for conditioning purposes. And Emile called me at home, and he was very good about keeping his staff informed and said, I just want you to know when you get into the office tomorrow, I want you to send a Twix. And people will say, well, what was a Twix? Well,
it's a cookie, right?
It really dates me, but Twix was a teletype machine that was used as communication with the National Hockey League Central Registry, where you would do player recalls, send downs, whatever, any transfer, but it had to be confirmed that way. He said, I want you to send a Twix out that we're recalling Ed Kia. I will call Jack Evans after the game. Jack was the coach of the Salt Lake Golden Eagles. and let him know Ed's coming back up. Well, that night, Ed Kia suffered an incredibly serious head injury. He was taken into the boards, and of course, he didn't wear a helmet. And as his head hit the boards, it really caused a serious issue. Well, Emile had told me before the game that Ed was being recalled. The Twix didn't go out until the next morning, but it created what I want to call probably a lot of controversy, because Alan Eagleson, as head of the Players Association, said that Ed was not entitled to disability compensation as an NHL player because the accident happened in the minors. Well, this was a serious head injury, and I know Emile Francis went to R. Haldane, got Ralston Purina's corporate plane, got the medical team from St. Louis to fly to Salt Lake City and bring Ed back to St. Louis and put him in the hospital here. But it was the compassionate side of Emile, and I know he fought the Players Association about getting Ed as much compensation. He did go to Ralston Purina and ask them to honor the balance of his contract. But that to me in the 83 of March was the biggest memory. What happened later in June, it happened, and we all knew that perhaps the franchise wasn't going to exist because Ralston tendered the ownership of the franchise back to the NHL and said, it's yours. And the Blues missed that draft.
Hang in there. More of Susie's great memories of the cat after a brief timeout.
Home is more than a place. It's full of the people and moments that matter most. Providing for loved ones, expanding your horizons, or simply living the life you love. With all you have to protect, choose insurance you can count on so you can experience more of what you live for. Country Financial. Experience more.
Call Shane McGranahan, taking care of all your insurance needs in Missouri and Illinois. With the new Career and Technical Education building at the Southwestern Illinois College Redbud campus, students have a place where hands-on training meets real-world experience. Meet Hunter, a proud SWIC alum who studied welding and turned his skills into a successful career.
My experience with the SWIC welding program was super hands-on. It really showed me all the technical aspects of the welding. Having a program like SWIC with the affordability like SWIC, it's unmatched.
Well, it all comes down to this, a best-of-7 battle, and DraftKings has you covered every step of the way. The DraftKings Sports app is now available in all 50 states and includes all markets. Sweat every shift of the series all in one place with one app. New DraftKings customers sign up with the code THPN, spend $5 to get $200 in rewards within 21 days. That's code THPN in partnership with DraftKings. The crown is yours. Bet with DK.
Bet with DK Sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 1-800-MY-RESET. New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. Connecticut, call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino in Kansas, that text pass-through may apply in Illinois. 21 and over. Void in Ontario. Event contract trading with DraftKings predictions involves risk of loss. Sportsbook bonus bets expire in 7 days. $50 in predictions dollars issued weekly for 3 weeks expire in 1 year. Redeem one non-withdrawable reward. Availability varies. Predictions offer void in New York. Ends June 28. Terms at dkng.co/audio.
But Tom, you talk about a draft, and I want to mention a great Emile Francis story. Back in 1978, this is after Ralston bought the team, and the player personnel wasn't as deep as some would like it. So at the 1978 NHL entry draft, as they call it, was held at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel in Montreal, Quebec. Everybody was present. You had a table, microphones, etc. And back then, there was no restriction on the number of rounds that you could draft. So Emile and his scouting staff used this as an opportunity to just shore up the depth of the Blues franchise. And literally the draft went on and on and on until every team passed. Well, the Blues were very active in it, and it was going to be a much longer day than anyone anticipated. So he said, Susie, why don't you go get some food for the scouts and the coaches that are sitting here? Well, I went to the head of the hotel ballroom, and he said, nope, we don't cater here. So I went to my room, ordered probably 2 cartloads of sandwiches and then wheeled them down to our draft table. Well, all of a sudden, the Blues are continuing to draft. Montreal is continuing to draft. Pittsburgh, who was very close, had a very close table to us, and I think the general manager was Baz Bastine, said to Emile, I will give you the rest of my picks if you'll give us sandwiches. And so the cat agreed to this, and so we had a couple picks in each round. But I'll never remember, I will never forget how vivid that story was in my mind, that I'm wheeling carts of sandwiches into the ballroom at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel.
This is one of the things Susie Mathieu did to keep us Blues fans to this very day. How about that? Well, I'm sure there's a lot of other things that you did along the way that we could talk about, but getting back to the cat, so at 83, eventually he leaves to go to Hartford to take a job with the Hartford Whalers. And was he I don't know, encouraged to do that, or was it his prerogative, or was he told, we've got a new guy, Ron Caron, we're going to bring in, and you need to find a new place?
Emile left prior to Harry Ernest appearing on the scene, to the best of my knowledge. Mm-hmm. Literally, when Ralston missed the draft, or the Blues missed the draft in 83, we were all told, this is it, your jobs have ended. And, you know, we're shutting the doors. For us in the PR department, it was like, okay, well, what should stay here as the history of the Blues in St. Louis? And I talked to the History Museum, and do they want any of the records or archives, or what goes wherever this team may transfer, if it transfers? And it wasn't until July of 83 that Harry Ernest appeared to be interested, because the NHL really didn't want, in my opinion, a franchise in Saskatchewan. They wanted to keep the Blues in St. Louis.
That's my memory.
I'll never forget Harold Ballard's famous quote, which was a rallying cry for our fans, is Saskatchewan is where God left his snowshoes. And it was kind of that rallying point. But at the time, I had left and been hired by the NFL. I worked for the football Cardinals at the time.
Remember that? Yeah.
The doors to the arena and the Blues operation were shut. And it wasn't until July that Harry Ernest was working with the NHL and the league Players Association to kind of bring together an ownership group, because he was unlikely as an owner. He appeared out of, I don't know, where he came from, but he did bring in Ron Caron, and I remember he called me and asked me if I would come back to work. And I hesitated because I was committed to the football Cardinals.
And Mr. Bidwell said, go ahead and go, right? Didn't he?
Pardon me?
Mr. Bidwell said, if you...
Yeah, Mr. Bidwell told me to go.
Ahead.
But back to Emile Francis, I think he had an offer and he had to take it. And that was, prior to anything else happening. And I do know that, when Ron Caron came on board, he saved the team, a lot of hassle by meeting an August 1st deadline with Central Registry and keeping some players in the fold of the St. Louis Blues. But I do believe that Emile left of his own volition and went because, quite frankly, it was a mess in St. Louis, Tom. It was... Yeah. The doors were shut, and who knew what was happening.
So he goes to Hartford, where he was general manager for a while, and then took a executive vice presidency or something like that until he retired. You mentioned his son, Bobby, earlier, and he coached, a lot of people forget, the Phoenix Coyotes for a while.
He did. And, I really knew Rick better because Rick was more my contemporary and he had played at St. Louis U. And he came on board and did the radio broadcasts for the Blues as a color man at one point in time. But both Bobby and Rick, had solid hockey backgrounds. And I imagine that's what happens when your father's Emile Francis.
Yeah. Bobby played briefly for the Red Wings, by the way, in the early 80s, too. So you did know Bobby. You did know Rick. I didn't know Rick did color on Blues games for a while.
He did for a bit. And what reminded me of that was we used to have two banquets a year. There was the goaltenders banquet and the blue liners banquet. And the goaltenders banquet was being held at the Chase Park Plaza. And Eddie Johnston was a goaltender for the Blues. And he came to me and he said, I have a speaker for the goaltenders banquet if you'd like. And I said, well, Eddie, who would it be? And he goes, Bobby Orr. And I said, well, how can you get Bobby Orr? He said, well, we're friends. Well, Bobby was with Chicago at the time and had a knee injury. Mm-hmm. And so Eddie made arrangements for Bobby Orr to come into St. Louis. And you observed this great hockey player in his playing days with the Bruins, and you knew the lore behind him was just phenomenal. But I didn't know what a great speaker he was. So he got up to speak, and he told the funniest story, and he said, I've had a lot of time in Chicago, but I can pick up the games on KMOX radio, and I love to listen to hockey whenever I can. And I kept hearing this Rick guy on the air, and it was Rick this and Rick that. And Dan Kelly would say, hey, Rick, and had no idea who he was until one day he said, we're going to interview Emile Francis, president and general manager. And Rick said on the radio, well, Dad. And Bobby said, that's when I knew who Rick Francis was. That story sticks in my mind because it was so comical and it was so well spoken.
Yeah. And it's, I guess, a tough call when you're interviewing the vice president and general manager, if you call him Dad or you call him Sir. So the Cat was inducted, as I said earlier, into the Hockey Hall of Fame in '82. While all that stuff was going on, he must have had a lot on his mind.
He really did. And, he managed things so well. But as I said, he was really, really old school. We had a game in Madison Square Garden, and I don't remember if it was televised or not. But during the game, Steve Durbano, whom we had a couple times in our franchise history, got into a fight. And as he was being escorted off the ice by the officials because he was being thrown out of the game, he mooned the crowd. And, hey, Steve Durbano was Steve Durbano, and God rest his soul.
Yeah.
But the next morning, Emile Francis called me up into his office and he goes, I have a question for you. What is mooning the crowd? And I had to explain to him, well, he bent over and pointed to his behind. He didn't take off his clothes, but that showed me how old school Emile Francis was, that I had to explain mooning to him.
Well, at least he didn't drop the drawers. That was a good thing. Yeah, Steve Durbano, he was, if you don't know, one of the guys who was not only an enforcer, but thought of as a little bit off kilter back in those days.
Yes, he was.
All right. Well, any other Emile the Cat Francis stories that you like to tell, Susie?
Well, there's one that's very personal, but I'll bring it up. I think it was back in 1981, and it was 4th of July weekend. I don't know if it was the 2nd or the 3rd of July or whatever, but my first child was due on July the 1st. And Emile called me at home and said, we're going to get Scott Campbell back. I want you to go in and prepare a press release. Well, what do? You go into work. And fortunately, I made it down to the arena, put out the press release, and I think we traded, Paul McLean, Brian Maxwell, and Ed Stanowski to Winnipeg for the rights to Scott Campbell. Now, Scott Campbell was a first-round pick of the Blues.
I remember
but he was
that.
Also a first-round pick of Houston in the WHA. Mm-hmm. I think they picked him 7th and 9th, and we picked 9th. Anyway, he went and signed with Houston and played there. But he was this really talented defenseman. I think in later years, he was compared with Scott Stevens, that kind of really solid defenseman. Well, I'm down at the arena putting out the press release, calling all the media outlets, etc. Every half hour, Emile Francis would call and say, have you had that baby yet? have you had that baby? Yep. And he was so concerned that I would, have to leave and deliver a baby while we were trading for Scott Campbell. Jennifer, of course, was born July 8th. She was late, as some firstborns are. But the sad thing about it was Scott Campbell never really then played for the Blues. He developed what was told to me by the medical staff as severe migraines and asthma, which complicated it. And he ended up retiring, I think at like 26 or 25, or I don't remember the age. But I do remember how concerned Emile Francis was that he was making this trade on 4th of July weekend.
For us Blues fans at the time, it was a really frustrating thing to not be able to see Scott Campbell play. I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what fond memories do you have of Emile the Cat Francis that we can wrap this up with?
One thing that I think is really important is that after he retired from his active roles in the NHL, he was put on the Hall of Fame selection committee, which was such an important position. And I do feel that he was instrumental in getting Bernie Federko, who was the first real true Blue. I mean, a lot of other players who wore the Blue note were in the NHL Hall of Fame, but I look at Bernie as being the first real true Blue to go there, who earned all of his accolades. And Bernie deserved every single ounce of that event. But I do think there was a nudge from Emile Francis along the way. And I do know that Emile kept in touch with a lot of his former employees, his scouts, Bobby Plager, you name it, Barclay Plager, throughout, even after he left St. Louis. I think he left a big piece of his heart in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm. So Bernie owes Emile the Cat Francis, rest his soul, that day off for the baby and also Hall of Fame.
Well, I think Bernie earned his Hall of Fame, but you're right. I mean, he was truly a compassionate, warm. He was just an awesome person.
Susie, thanks so much for your time again. It's always great chatting with you, and as always, I need to thank you so much for getting this little run of mine started as the PA for the Blues.
Well, it's all you. You put in the hours, and you never missed a game, and I just marvel at how I saw all that way back when. Wish I could take credit for any of it. Thanks, Tom.
Well, thank you, Susie. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for being with me for another episode of the St. Louis Blues Hockey Legends Podcast. We'll have another legend coming up soon, so stay tuned to our social media for news on who that legend might be. Visit PAGuyTom.com or BluesHockeyLegends.com and sign up for our Legends email notifications. The Legends Podcast is also available on the Scoops Sports Network at scoopswithdannymac.com. Video of the podcast is published the Monday after the Friday release of the audio. As always, please like and share on Facebook, X, and Instagram, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It all keeps the Legends Podcast alive and well. Tom Calhoun here saying thanks for being a fan, and let's go Blues!